Study while others are sleeping, work while others are loafing, prepare while others are playing, dream while others are wishing. Good morning, students. I welcome you all to yet another session of English. In today's class, we are going to see the second poem, The Listeners. This is a memory poem which is written by Walter de la Mare. About the author. The poet, Walter de la Mare, is an English poet, short story writer, and novelist. He is probably best remembered for his works for children, and especially for the poem The Listeners, and for a highly acclaimed selection of subtle psychological horror stories. The Listener was published in 1912 as a title poem of his second collection of poetry. It remains one of his most famous pieces of writing and reflects the author's fascination with mystery and the supernatural. The poem tells the story of an unnamed traveler approaching an abandoned house seemingly inhabited by ghosts, but leaves the readers many questions as to who these entities actually are. The Listeners by Walter de la Mare. "Is there anybody there?" said the traveler, knocking on the moonlit door. And his horse in the silence champed the grasses of the forest's ferny floor. And a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveller's head. And he smote upon the door again a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said. But no one descended to the traveller, no head from the leaf-fringed sill, leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, where he stood perplexed and still. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveller's call.
"Is there anybody there?" said the traveler, knocking on the moonlit door. Moonlit door means visible door in the light of moon. It suggests that traveler was knocking the door at night time. And his horse in the silence champed the grasses of the forest's ferny floor. Ferns are flowerless small plants. Champed means to bit and chew. It seems horse was eating the grass around the house. And a bird flew up out of the turret, above the traveler's head. Turret means a small tower on top of a larger tower or at the corner of a building or wall, typically of a castle. And he smote upon the door again a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said. Smote means to knock loudly. But no one descended to the traveler. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, where he stood perplexed and still. Sill is a horizontal piece of timber beneath a window or a door. Fringed means decorated. It seems that window of the house was covered with leaves. Descend means to come down. Perplexed means confused or puzzled. Still means no movement. It seems that nobody was living in the house, as nobody was replying to knocks of the traveler. Windows were covered with leaves, which indicates that house was deserted. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men. Phantom means ghosts. Lone house suggests that there was no one living in the house. Dwelt means living at certain place. World of men suggest that phantoms and alive people live in different type of worlds. Stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveler's call. Thronging means filled or crowded. Faint means weak. Hearkening means to hear attentively. Stirred means mixed. It seems that phantom's shape was made from rays of moonlight, and it was carefully listening to the calls of traveler through the vibrations created by it and air around it.
Okay children, now I'm going to give you the summary of this poem. An unnamed figure, the traveler, knocks on the door of a house in the moonlight and asks if there is anyone inside. The traveler's horse gazes in the quiet forest while the traveler awaits for a response. A bird flies out of a small tower on the house and over the traveler's head. The traveler knocks again more forcefully and repeats his question. No one comes down from the house to meet him. However, no one even leans out of the window, the sill of which is covered in leaves, to look at him. He stands in place, puzzled by the lack of answer. Inside the house is a group of ghostly beings. These listeners stand in the moonlight as they listen to the human voice coming from outside. The ghostly beings crowd around the staircase onto which moonlight streaks, as a quiet atmosphere in the empty house is disturbed by the sound of the traveler's lonely voice. The traveler senses a strange presence in the silence that meets his question. His horse, undisturbed, continues to gaze and obscured by trees. The traveler suddenly beats on the door once again, even more loudly than before. He then calls out, asking whoever is listening to pass on a message that no one answered him when he came to the house, but he kept his promise. The listeners don't make any motion in response to this. The traveler's words reverberate through the dark, empty house coming from the only living person around. The phantom or ghostly listeners hear him jump upon his horse, and then the sound of the horseshoes on the stone path as the traveler rides away. The silence of the forest quickly returns as the sound of the horses forcefully riding fades away. Children, this is a memory poem, so memorize the whole poem.